The homeopathic remedy selection is based on the symptoms provided by the patient to his homeopath.
Here is a guideline what information you should provide to your homeopath.
At what time in the 24 hours do you feel worst?
In which season do you feel less well?
How do you stand the cold, hot, dry, and wet weather?
How does fog affect you?
What do you feel when exposed to the sun?
How does change of weather affect you?
What about snow?
What kind of climate is objectionable to you, and where would you choose to spend your vacation?
How do you feel before, during and after a storm?
What are your reactions to north wind, south wind, to the wind in general?
What about drafts of air and changes of temperature?
What about warmth in general, warmth of the bed, of the room, of the stove?
How do you react to extremes of temperature?
What difference do you make in your clothing in winter?
What about taking colds in winter and in other seasons?
How do you keep your window at night?
What position do you like best? Sitting, standing, lying?
How do you feel standing a while, or while kneeling?
What sports do you engage in?
What about riding in cars or sailing?
How do you feel before, during, and after meals?
What about your appetite? How do you feel if you go without a meal?
What quantity and what do you drink? What about thirst?
What are the foods that make you sick, and why?
What about wine, beer, coffee, tea, milk, vinegar?
How much do you smoke in a day, and how do you feel after smoking?
What are the drugs to which you are very sensitive or which make you sick?
What are the vaccinations you have had, and the results from them?
What about cold or warm baths, sea baths?
How do you feel at the seaside, or on high mountains?
How do collars, belts, and tight clothing affect you?
How long are your wounds in healing? How long in bleeding?
In what circumstances have you felt like fainting?
What are the greatest griefs that you have gone through in your life?
What about wine, beer, coffee, tea, milk, vinegar?
What are the greatest joys you have had in life?
At what time in the 24 hours do you feel blue, depressed, sad, pessimistic?
How do you stand worries?
On what occasions do you weep?
What effect does consolation have on you?
On what occasions do you feel despair?
In what circumstances have you ever felt jealous?
When and on what occasions do you feel frightened or anxious?
How do you feel in a room full of people, at a seminar, at a lecture?
Do you go red or white when you are angry, and how do you feel afterwards?
How do you stand waiting?
How rapidly do you walk, eat, talk, write?
What have been the complaints or effects following chagrin, grief, disappointed love, vexation, mortification, indignation, bad news, fright?
In time of depression, how do you look at death?
Tell your homeopath about overconsciousness and overscrupulousness, about trifles. Some people do not care about too many details and too much order.
What about your character before, during and after your period?
What is the kind of food for which you have a marked craving or aversion? Or what are those that make you sick or you cannot eat?
What about pastry and sweets?
What about sour or spiced food?
What about rich or greasy food?
How much salt do you need for your taste?
What about thirst and what do you drink? Coffee, wine, beer, etc.
In which position do you sleep, and since when that position? Where do you put your arms, and how do you like to have your head?
What are you doing during sleep?
Some people speak, laugh, shriek, weep, are restless, are afraid, grind their teeth, have their mouth or their eyes open.
At what time do you wake up, or when are you sleepy? What makes you restless or sleepy?
What about dreams?
The female patients should provide the additional details.
At what age did they begin?
How frequently do they come?
What about their duration, abundance, color, odor? What about clots, etc.?
At what time in the 24 hours do they flow most?
How do you feel before, during, and after menses?